Good afternoon, everybody. Those with electronic devices may use them to transmit what they have heard in the inquiry, but only 10 minutes after, or more than 10 minutes after, what they are describing. Those devices may not be used to record, and not that any are in this room, or photograph. Yes. May the witness be sworn, please.
Hello, Wendy.
Hello.
Hi, I'm the usher and I'm going to take you through the affirmation. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Please can you repeat after me? I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Yes.
I will refer to you throughout this hearing as Wendy because you've been granted anonymity. You provided a 30-page signed witness statement to the inquiry. It was dated the 30th of May 2025. So it is at tab A1 in your bundle. Wendy, can you confirm that the contents of your witness statement are true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
That puts the whole of your witness statement into evidence now. Many of my questions will be about UCO HN16, undercover name James Straven, code name Magenta Triangle, but I will refer to him by his real name, James Thompson. And just for the context of your evidence, James Thompson was deployed as an SDS UCO between January 1997 and March 2002.
Understood.
Wendy, before I begin, may I just outline to you the areas of questioning that I'm going to ask you. They will include how you became interested in animal rights and your involvement with the Croydon Hunt Saboteurs, your friendship and interaction with James Thompson, his relationship with Sarah and Ellie, his reporting on you, also the contact that James Thompson had with you after he finished his deployment, and finally the impact that James Thompson's conduct had on you.
Yep.
Let me begin with your interest in animal welfare and your involvement with the Croydon Hunt Saboteurs. Would it be fair to say that from a young age you developed a commitment to animal welfare?
Yes, I was always very keen on animals, thought I was an animal lover, and then kind of got a bit of a shock when I first started learning about some of the things that I'd been inadvertently doing to animals, when I kind of came across an animal rights stall when I was about 14 and started actually paying a bit more attention to what I could do to, at the very least, avoid harming animals.
And that moment when you stopped at an animal welfare stand and began to speak to the people who were running the stand, was that a turning point in your life?
Yeah, I would say it was. I went vegetarian straight away, and I started attending protests. There was actually a local vivisection laboratory called Bibra, which was near in the area that I could reach, and I learned about its existence. There were protests around that, which I attended when I could. Obviously, I was 14 years old, so everything was, with the reluctant approval of my mother, but I became more and more involved in that kind of protest activity.
And a couple of years after that, you have described how at the age of 16, someone you knew told you about hunt sabotage by using voice calls, false scent trails to try and keep the hounds from chasing the foxes. Is that right?
Yes, correct. That person wasn't actually a hunt saboteur, but they knew the hunt saboteurs, and so they kind of introduced me, I guess, and they actually took me out on my first hunt where I wasn't taking part as a saboteur, but so that I had somebody there, because I was still only 16 years old, to show me, introduce me to people, show me what it was going to be like if I did want to get more involved. And I went out a couple of times that season, and then I started attending regularly when I was 17.
So how did you first become involved specifically with the Croydon hunt saboteurs?
That was just the group that the contact I had who wasn't a saboteur knew somebody who was. I don't even remember who they knew, but they were able to go, well, I'll bring you out even though I'm not a sab, and we'll see what it's like and get a feel for it, and I'll introduce you to a couple of people.
We've heard about the Croydon hunt saboteurs. It's referred to in a number of intelligence reports. But could you paint a picture for us? So, for example, how many people were in the Croydon hunt saboteurs when you first began to associate with them?
I mean, I think it's important to note it's not, even though there is the Hunt Saboteurs Association, it's not like we sign up to a membership and have to, commit to weekly meetings or anything like that. So you might go out one week and there was 4 people, and then you might go out the next week and there would be 20 people. I would say there was a core group of around 10 people who would be there if they could.
In relation to that core group of 10, could you just help us with roughly how old they were? What sort of age were they?
I was the youngest. I don't think there was anybody else under 18, but there was certainly some, I think 19, 20, 21. And then there was some who were late 20s to early 30s. And that would probably be the general, it was quite physical. So, now being in my 40s, I don't think I would be running across fields I would be doing so well. And I think probably it put off people who weren't up to the physicality of it.
So you've helped us with the sort of age range. What about the number of men compared to number of women? Were there more men, more women, or about evenly based?
There were definitely more men than women. In the Croydon Sabs, I was mostly the only female out in the field. Sarah obviously started attending, but was mostly map reading in the van, as she spoke about. There was a couple more women in the Brixton group who we would sometimes be going out with. I would say they probably had 3 or 4 women that would come out sometimes. But in the Croydon group, it was usually just me in the field. At the time I joined, there was another committed female who came along later, but at that time I was the only one.
Now, during hunt season, how often would you be out with the Croydon hunt saboteurs on average?
Pretty much every weekend.
The other time of year, the other part of the year, what sort of activity were you engaged in, again, with the Croydon hunt saboteurs?
Off season, it wasn't so much doing things mostly as a SAB group. So you might do a fundraising stall with 1 or 2 of the other SABs that you've organized between yourselves. You might all meet up for a particular protest. Or you might be going with one or other person to something, an event, that kind of thing. But it wasn't as structured off season.
What about the social scene? How social was it as well?
It was very social, and that wasn't because we were all having a good jolly. It was more because after a hunt, you really needed to decompress. So people would tend to go to the pub as a group and just sit and have a chat and bring everything back down. And then because of that, of course, you get to know people more, and you get to like certain people, have more in common with some than others. And then you would organize dinners and, just social outings. But as a group, we would generally, most people would go to the pub after just to try and decompress.
Would you describe it as a close-knit group of people?
Not necessarily the entire group close-knit, because there would be people that would come out every now and then, and of course they'd be invited to the pub after, and people would look out for them and have the same respect for them, but they might not, there were people who I wouldn't have socialized with outside of the hunt days, and there were people who I'm sure wouldn't have wanted to socialize with me outside of those days. You made your friends within the group.
What was the purpose, what was your motivation for being in the Croydon Hunt Saboteurs? Perhaps an obvious question, but if you'd been asked at the time, why are you here doing these hunt sabs, what would your answer have been then?
To try and stop animals being killed. It's one of the few direct actions that you can take where you can have an immediate impact on an animal's life. And that to me was not something I couldn't do. If I had the ability to stop an animal being killed right in front of me for fun, then I would do that.
And how successful were you and the group in achieving that?
It varied. It would vary often based on the meat. So the location that they were hunting, there were certain meats where when you realized that's where you were going to be that day, you prepared yourself for a really hard day, because there were foxes everywhere. And if they killed 3, it was a good day. And there were other days where we frustrated the hunt completely and managed to stop them killing at all.
I want to move now to when you first met James Thompson. How old were you when you first met James Thompson?
I was 17.
Were you still at school?
Yes.
Studying A-levels at that time?
Correct. Yes. Studying A-levels and living at home with my mother.
Do you have a clear memory of the first time that you met him?
I don't, but I have what I think is my first memory of meeting him, but it was a long time ago. If it wasn't the first time, it was one of the very first times, which was when we would sometimes meet at a location and then travel together as a group in a vehicle to the hunt meet. And I do remember being in the back of a van and having a conversation with him quite early on when I was going out, and realizing that, for want of a better term, he was quite posh. And at the time, you wouldn't believe it now, but at the time I was quite posh. And I think we kind of went, oh, okay, we're both going to get a bit of ribbing for being the middle class sabs, as it were, or as he liked to refer to himself, upper middle class.
When you first met him, could you help us with how he introduced himself to you, or how someone else introduced you? You wouldn't really just start. You wouldn't walk up and go,
hi, I'm Wendy, it would seem a little bit strange. So you'd normally actually start a conversation and just get to know each other a little bit, and then names would come up. And I do remember James Blonde coming up very early on.
Can I
I
ask
knew him
you,
as that almost from the beginning.
did he use that nickname himself, or is it other people calling him that? How do you recall?
He never used it himself, but it was used in front of him regularly.
Do you know why he had that nickname? Was it just because his first name was James and he had blonde hair?
No, he seemed like a very obvious. He didn't fit the mold at all. And I think that's partly why we became friends, because perhaps I didn't fit the mold either. But he seemed suspicious very early on. And because his name was James, and because he had blonde hair, and because he maybe seemed like a spy, it was an easy nickname to lay on him, as it were.
But at the time, were there suspicions in the group that he was a spy?
It was kind of early on, I would say yes. Early on, and you couldn't treat everybody who came out as though they were a spy, but at the same time, you wouldn't, with open arms go, this is my full name and address and date of birth and, my workplace or place of education. You'd retain information to yourself until you were really confident of someone. He was somebody that it probably took longer for people to begin being confident with.
Is that something that was always at the back of people's minds in animal rights activism, that there may be a spy amongst you? Was that something that was ever discussed, or anything that's occupied any of your thinking time? Were people concerned?
Absolutely. We knew that there were phone taps at the time, both because you would hear clicking when you picked up the line, but also because if you shared false information, you'd see the end result being that the police would turn up at the false place instead of where you were actually going. So we were very aware that the phones were being tapped. But in regards to people coming out, I do remember an experience where somebody who was actually an undercover journalist came out, and next week there's a story in the papers. So again, it's not so much that you treat everybody like a spy, but you treat everybody at arm's length initially.
But as you've described,
and they build trust.
As you've described, there was something about James Thompson that aroused some suspicion early on,
Yes.
but of course nobody knew who he really was.
Correct. And part of that, I think, was just the way he would walk and talk and hold himself. He was just always a bit off. But then after a certain amount of time, when he starts being close friends and he starts dating, of course you go, well, he's just a bit off. He's just a bit of an oddball. And that's just him.
I'm not suggesting that he formally introduces himself by the name James Straven and then gives his own biography, but he told you about himself, and I just want to ask you some questions about the sort of thing that he told you about his life, and you refer to this in your statement. So he told you and the group that he had children with his ex-wife, is that right?
Correct. And I believe he told me that it was his ex-wife. I know he's said to other people it was his partner, but I'm pretty sure he told me it was his ex-wife.
Did he also say that he still saw her and or the children regularly? Did he talk about that?
He saw the children regularly. He certainly gave no indication that he had any ongoing contact with her other than seeing the children.
So, for example, would he often or very rarely sort of disappear off saying to you or the group, well, I've just got to go and see my children. Was that ever used as an excuse for not being around?
Yeah, absolutely. If it was, or who's out next week? Oh, I've got the kids, so I won't be.
And you nor anyone in the group ever saw those children?
No, correct.
Okay. He also said that he was from a well-to-do Scottish family, is that right?
He did, yes.
And could you just provide us a bit more detail in relation to that? How did that come about, him telling you that? Was it something that he was proud of, or how did that come to the surface?
Yeah, he would always... It's hard to describe. I can see his smirk in my face right now. He'd always be saying things in a kind of ironic but boastful way. So he's dropping things in this self-deprecating, humorous way, but also having a bit of a boast at the same time.
In telling you about himself, did he identify as a vegetarian as well?
I remember him as a vegetarian. Again, I think some people, he told him he was a vegan, but I remember him as a vegetarian.
Did he also mention that he was interested in martial arts?
He did, yes.
I'm going to ask you about what he said about what he did for a living.
Mm-hmm.
So what did he tell you? What did he tell the group about what his job was?
So this was probably the thing he was most open about and shared the most information about, because he told everybody pretty much that he was a locations producer or a locations manager, and that he traveled a lot finding locations for TV shows and movies and the like. And so it was one of the reasons that he would be away sometimes. But he also would regularly tell anecdotes from his job. So that was probably one of the things, if you were sitting at the pub and just chatting, he'd be quite happy to share an anecdote about who he'd been working with.
Now, I don't know whether you saw any of the opening of the inquiry when, in particular, a document was put up on screen from the British Film Institute. I don't know whether you recall that.
Yes.
Or whether I'm going to ask, in fact, if that could please be put on the screen, because we've already seen this before in that opening. But as you can see, and this is not a historic document, but I hope it is clear on your screen, you can see at the top is the name Coming Home, the date 12th of April 1998. Now just pausing there, by that time, how well had you got to know James Thompson at that time?
Pretty well. So I remember him talking about working with Joanna Lumley and getting on very well with her. And I remember him telling an anecdote about Peter O'Toole and how he was a raging alcoholic. And so he sabotaged his trailer on set so that it sunk into sewage, essentially. And that was obviously from that shoot where, and those things may very well have happened as well. But he was quite vocal in sharing when he worked with someone, or if he had a funny story, or, he boasted about knowing Keira Knightley, and told the anecdote, I think Ellie mentioned earlier, about getting fired from the BBC because he mocked, it was Gillian Tailforth, who had been prosecuted for performing oral sex on her partner and got caught in a car doing it. And so there was a moment when he was on a shoot with her and she was bent over and he started laughing.
So in relation to what we can see there now on screen is one example, and you can see James Straven's name under the credits. Can you see the third line?
Yes.
Towards the middle?
Yes.
It's still there today. And Wendy, I want to ask you about a question that the inquiry will be considering is that at this time, James Thompson was an undercover officer, and how he found the time to carry out work in the film industry as a location assistant. And so could you help us with this? How much time, from your point of view, from everything that you saw at the time, was he away doing film work, TV work?
Pretty regularly. I would say every couple of months he'd be gone for maybe 3 weeks. But also bear in mind, we weren't full-time animal activists. We were going out when the hunt went out. We might meet up during the week, but pretty much the week was his. And then he was just with us on the weekends, maybe the odd evening. So he had all the time in the world to do whatever he wanted to do, I suppose, and whatever he was getting extra money for.
Wendy, I'd like to explore with how this friendship between you and James Thompson developed.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, we can take that document down, thank you. In particular, I want to move to a time period between mid-2000 to the beginning of 2001.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Now, at that time, is it right that mid-2000 that your then partner, that relationship came to an end? Is that right?
Yes, correct. That would have been the end of May.
Did that also coincide with, and you describe a particular occasion in your statement where your late mother takes you out for dinner, tells you that her cancer has returned. And so breaking that news to you was close to the time of your relationship breakdown as well.
It was certainly close. I would say, I think it was early August that she first told me. So a couple of months after the end of the relationship.
You've described in your statement that your friendship with James Thompson, that it intensified after your relationship broke down with your then partner. Could you just describe that and explain what you mean by that?
James was very supportive of me breaking up with my partner. And I, at the time, obviously thought that was just because he was being a supportive friend and he thought it was a bad relationship for me. But he made a lot more effort to see me on my own after that. Whereas previously, I don't have a lot of memories when I was with my partner, who I was with from the time James had met me up until that time. I don't have a lot of memories of James and I seeing each other on our own while I was in a relationship. But after that relationship ended, we spent time together alone.
Was James Thompson aware that you had a very close bond, a very close relationship with your mother?
Yes, he was one of the people that I spoke to after I found out she was terminally ill. And obviously I was very distressed about that.
You've described how James Thompson met your mother?
Correct. He met her in her home twice from memory. Once was when we knew she was terminal, but she was still relatively well. Her health hadn't declined at that point, even though we knew it was coming. And I remember on that occasion, she said to me after, why don't you want to go out with him? He seems lovely. You wouldn't want him because he's a nice one. And I said, I just don't see him like that, Mum. And she'd never really pressured, not that she was pressuring me, but she'd never really kind of been vocal about me being with somebody or not being with somebody, other than not wanting me to be with my ex-partner. But now, and I said to her, why are you suddenly trying to make me date people? And she said, well, because I don't want you to be alone after I'm gone. I don't like the idea of that. I'd really like to see you with someone. And obviously now I hate the fact that she thought he was a nice guy who I could potentially be with after she was dead. But that conversation sticks out very strongly for me. And the second time he met her in her home, she was declined. And I was a lot more emotionally fragile at that time. And I think he was just taking me out for dinner that time because I wasn't really doing anything activism-wise.
So the example you gave that he was taking you out for dinner, was this with the group? What sort of scenario
I think
was that?
on that occasion we were going to meet a couple of other people for dinner, but he was coming to pick me up and take me to ensure I was still, seeing people and getting out the house.
The other thing that you refer to James Thompson doing at this time is not just taking you out for dinner, but you also say he took you out on hunt protests during the illness of your mother, also the way you describe it, also to get you out of the house.
Correct. So I have a very clear, obviously around the time of my mother being severely ill and dying, things get very foggy and just certain things come through as really clear memories. And, you don't unfortunately get to choose which those are. But one of my very clear memories was he actually took me out sabbing when she was in a coma in the last days. So she wasn't coming back out of the coma. And I was pretty much exclusively at the hospital during that time. And she was in a coma for a couple of weeks, unfortunately. It wasn't. I was told when they stopped life support that she would be gone in a couple of days, and she lasted 10 days after that. So it was a very difficult time. And I remember him saying, I will come and pick you up. You don't have to talk to anyone else while you're out there. You don't have to talk to me. We'll go out, we'll go sabbing, and I'll drop you back, and let's just, you can't just be at the hospital all the time.
So he took you out hunt sabbing at a time when you wouldn't ordinarily go hunt sabbing because you were with your
I wasn't.
mother.
Yeah, I wasn't going anywhere.
Now, the way in which you describe it, he took me out hunt sabbing, but what physically did that mean? So what activities did you engage in at that time when he took you out?
So basically just where normally we would meet as a group and I would have driven somewhere to meet people or, get to a train station, whatever it may be, he came and picked me up from my home and we met everybody else. And then I just did what we would normally do out sabbing, which was trying to stay up with the huntsman and who was controlling the hounds. And if there was a fox who broke cover, trying to prevent a kill. And I honestly couldn't tell you. I probably wasn't a very useful sab that day. Couldn't tell you if they killed, if I kept up, if I was any use, because that's all a blur. I just remember being there.
I want to draw a distinction between what you felt about James Thompson's actions at that time compared with looking back on what he did from the perspective of today. At the time, and I think you describe him in your statement during your mother's illness, you describe him as a primary source of support. Okay.
Yes, I was incredibly grateful at the time. I felt like he really stepped up. I know he drove me to hospital on at least one occasion to visit my mother, because I was just relying on lifts from whoever would turn up and take me. He would check in a lot. He was a very calm, gentle person to have around, I suppose, at that time. He had a very calming manner, whereas, I wasn't somebody who wanted to lie on the floor crying all the time. I'm not that person. And he was somebody who would be happy to just sit in silence, or, go, well, let's just go have a beer and then we can leave. And, he seemed to know what I needed.
So at the time, a strong source of support. But looking back now, with the knowledge that you have now of who he was, how do you view exactly that particular period of time and his actions then from the perspective of today?
I think he saw an opportunity when I was vulnerable. And perhaps, I was single, I was vulnerable, I needed someone. And he thought this might be a good opportunity to, start a new relationship to keep my legitimacy going. She's friends with the other people that I'm spying on. This is a good chance for me. The thing that disgusts me the most of all of this are the times like this, and the time when he went to Indonesia to see L4, where even if you are doing your job as an undercover officer infiltrating a group, which I don't obviously agree with as a concept, if you had any shred of human decency and empathy, there are times when you could very easily use your children or your job as a locations producer to say, I'm so sorry, I can't be there for that, and let somebody who is genuinely close to that person step in and support them. And he instead took those times as an opportunity for himself.
You have described the developing friendship with James Thompson over this period of time. But I want to turn now to something that you have referred to in your statement. Is it paragraph 6.1? I'm just going to read it to you and I'm just going to ask you about it. You say this: having met me at 17 and positioning himself in my inner circle when I was at my most vulnerable, I think James Thompson was preying upon me as someone he perceived he could potentially have a future sexual relationship with too. Could you help us with why you came to that conclusion, that he potentially perceived you as a future sexual relationship partner?
Yeah, I mean, there were some very specific incidences which I actually spoke to Ellie at the time about. Well, one before I was close to Ellie, and I think this one was actually when I was still with my ex-partner, but I think James, I'd been speaking to James about things weren't great. And we were at an environmental fair, and I went for a bit of a wander around with him and another friend who was there, and I tried on a top, and there was no mirror. It was a fair, so I'd just kind of hidden behind a little nook and changed tops and came out and said, oh, what do you think? And he giggled and did some eyebrow waggling and went, yes, you should definitely get it. And then whispered something to our other friend. And I kind of went, what's going on? And then I realized it was a really flimsy top. And the top I'd come in to the event wasn't a flimsy top, and I hadn't worn a bra. And I suddenly felt incredibly exposed. And I just remember that heat rising where you have this moment of embarrassment. And it wasn't, I shouldn't have been embarrassed about it, but I was. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, he didn't mean it like that. He wouldn't have done that on purpose. He probably thought I knew and was fine with it. And there was that, and that stored obviously in my memory, but didn't raise enough flags at the time. And then,
sorry, just before we move on, just staying with that, how old were you then?
Probably 19.
I'm sorry, Wendy, I interrupted you because you were going to go on to another example.
Yes. So, and I can't be clear if this was just before my mother was dying or just after she died, but we were going to another gathering. And again, he had, and I think, no, actually, it would have been when she was alive and he came to the house to pick me up. Now I think of it. I think that may have been the first time he met her. But I can't be sure on that. But we were driving to an event that was further away, and we were going just the two of us. And then others were going to be there that we knew. But he had said, I will come and get you and we'll go together. And he knew I would look at property in the future. And so we went past a house with a for sale sign, obviously in a completely different area. I wouldn't have been looking at that house, and I wasn't looking to buy at that point. But he went, why don't we stop in and have a look? It'll be fun and it'll give you some ideas of what you're after. And I said, okay, because they had an open house at the time. And the whole way around the house, he pretended we were a couple. And then when we got to the bathroom, it had an extra large shower. And he went into the shower cubicle and he went, oh, yes, this is a perfect size for two, and did the eyebrow waggle again and then winked at me. And I just remember thinking, oh, Christ, is he trying to flirt? Like, does he think we're moving somewhere that I don't want to move with this? And I was a bit awkward the rest of the day. And then I spoke to Ellie about it. I don't know if it was that day or in the coming days. And I said, I'm really worried. I think James is thinking we're going to start something, and I just am not interested in him like that. He's more like a brother, and I don't want to affect the friendship. So I don't know if I should address it or just try and give off the vibe very clearly that I'm not interested, but I really value him as a friend.
And again, just so that we can see it in the context of time, how old were you when you went round the house as you've just described?
I would have been 20 then.
All right. You've also referred in your statement to the animal hospital where you worked, that James Thompson, on a couple of occasions, went there when you were working there?
Correct. So I know he went at least twice, I think 3 times. So I think he attended 2 working bees, but he definitely attended 1. And then he definitely attended another occasion where a mutual friend had returned from overseas, and he was a very close friend. And I hadn't seen him in a long time. And James had actually picked him up and brought him straight to the wildlife hospital to see me, even though I was at work, because I wanted to see him. And James brought him to my work so that I could see him.
And so when he did attend your place of work, did you know he was going to be attending there? Did he tell you in advance, well, I'm going to be at your work a bit later?
The working bee, yes, I knew he was going to be coming. When he came with our mutual friend. I think he'd messaged to say, I've got somebody you might want to see. We're going to stop in. And it was a bit of a surprise for me.
So how close were you at this time? If someone had asked you at the time that you've just described, who is James Thompson? Would you describe him as a friend, or what was he to you then?
He was a very close friend and somebody I felt I could rely on. And I'm quite an independent person, so there's not many people I rely on.
Wendy, I want to contrast what you have just described with what James Thompson has said about the nature of your relationship in his statement. And didn't necessarily get it up on screen, but the statement is UCPI 3/553. It's page 115 in his statement, and the paragraph references are 340 to 341. Again, Wendy, what I'll do is let me just read out what he says, and I know you've already read it, but I'll read it out and then just ask you some questions about it. Mm-hmm. So paragraph 340, he says, I do remember Wendy. She was Privacy's girlfriend. She was an animal rights activist. I got to know her through Privacy, who was a target of mine. I would describe her as a close associate in that I came to know her well through Privacy and her animal rights activities. He goes on in the next paragraph to say she was a close associate within my target group. I wouldn't describe her as a close personal friend. Now, firstly, with that phrase, close associate, when you first saw that in James Thompson's inquiry statement, what was your reaction?
My reaction was, well, that's the second time he's lied under oath to the inquiry.
In that earlier paragraph that I read, paragraph 340, where he says he got to know you through Privacy, who was a target of his. So he's referring to the person that you broke up with in mid-2000, is that right?
Correct.
But you have just described earlier that, in fact, the relationship, your friendship, deepened after that friendship had finished.
Correct. Yes. I would also note, and I'm sure it will come up later, but at the time that he tried to disrupt in some way the purchase of my house, I was not with Privacy. I'd also note that when he first met me and became friends with me, he didn't know initially that I was in a relationship with Privacy because it wasn't public knowledge. As I later realized, it wasn't public knowledge so that Privacy could also sleep with every other woman he met without them knowing he was in a relationship. But at the time, I just thought it was because, that wasn't something that we needed to share with all and sundry. So when James initially befriended me, he would have thought I was single. And then he would have quickly realized once we became friends that I was in a relationship.
Now, I know, Wendy, you've read James Thompson's statement. Mm-hmm. And although I've just read to you paragraph 340 and 341, in fact, he repeats another similar sentence about 6 times in his statement. And I'll just read the sentence once. The nature of my relationship with Wendy remained that of a close associate throughout the time that I knew her. And I'll just give the references for that. But that sentence is repeated in paragraph 342.1, 343.3, 344, 345, 346, 347. And again, when you read that repeated, what effect did it have on you to read that repetition?
I thought, wow, I was a pretty close associate for 21 years. That's a long time to not be a personal close friend of somebody and to be a close associate by means of a relationship that in fact ended at the time that I found out he was an undercover officer 18 years previously.
Now, we'll come on to, in due course, the investigation at the time that some of the managers conducted in relation to James Thompson. But what came out of those investigations is when they had a look at his calls, who he was calling, and the volume of calls, and the number of calls to you. And the explanation that James Thompson gave in his statement was that some of these calls may have been for me leaving a message for Ellie when I could not get hold of her because they shared a house together. I think the majority would be in relation to organising hunt sabs and other protests. So in relation to all of the calls that were made to you, is that right? Is there truth in that when James Thompson says that firstly some of the calls may have been him leaving a message for Ellie?
Firstly, no. I would note that from the call logs that I've seen, almost all the calls are registered as 0 minutes, 0 seconds. I think they were text messages. We didn't call very often. We would text. So I think most of those are text messages. There would never be an occasion where he would call me to leave a message for Ellie because either I was in the room with Ellie or I wasn't. So why on earth would he be calling me to say, can you tell Ellie I'll see her tonight? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. She also had a mobile phone.
So at the time that James Thompson is texting you, calling you, well, Ellie's got her own mobile phone.
Correct. And so a shared landline where he had the opportunity to leave a voice message.
I'm not going to, of course, go through every single call or message, but I just want to just flag up a couple of pages just to give us a snapshot. It is search your tab B13. It is MPS 0719 641. And in particular, please could we look at pages 22 and then 23. Wendy, can I just ask, is this coming up on your screen clearly or is it difficult to read? I'm not going to...
Oh, there we go. Yep, no, that's better. My eyes aren't the best anymore.
Well
I can see that now, yes.
Now, if we look at that, and so we can see this is the telephone that is making these calls. This is the SDS mobile phone. So at the time, this is his undercover job phone, this particular one. And we can see towards the middle, can you see the 3rd of August 2001? So that is the time that we're concerned with. And we can see 3rd of August, there is a call to you. It looks as though it's 3 seconds. And then later, there's another call, 7 seconds. And there's a 10-minute call. Can you see 15:14:51?
Yeah, that's a very long message for Ellie.
And I'm not going to descend into the detail of them. Some are short calls, some are 0, which you indicated are probably text messages. But if you look at this page, what is clear, isn't it, is that your name features quite heavily on these days, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th of August.
Yep.
Could we turn over the page, please? And again, we're now moving into the 7th of August. Your name appears again and again.
Yes, and I believe those are almost exclusively text messages.
What sort of text messages? About getting into contact with Ellie? About what?
I honestly don't think he would ever asked me if I could get in contact with Ellie, because if I wasn't with her at the time, why was she going to answer me if she wasn't answering him? It's the most bizarre excuse he could have thought of, to be honest. If we were messaging regularly or speaking regularly on a certain day, it was probably because we had plans. I can't obviously tell you what those plans were, but we weren't kind of, either of us, the kind of person to just send a message going, hope you have a great day, buddy. So if there was lots of back and forth, we'd be planning something. It would be a dinner, or we'd be catching up with other people, or, you know, whatever it may be.
And I'm just going to ask if we could just skip through just a couple of extra pages just to give us a snapshot of this. This is August 2001, so we're over the page then. Again, your name appears on that page. If we turn over the page again, please. More references to you, Wendy. We turn over the page, please. Again, your name appears on this page a couple of times. Turn over the page, please. Your name doesn't appear on this page. Could we go further, please? And then we see Ellie. There is, in the middle of that page, can you see 2nd of September?
Yes,
there is a call
I can.
to Ellie, because as you say, she too had a mobile phone.
Correct.
Thank you. I wonder if that document could please be taken off the screen. Thank you. We have obviously heard evidence from Sarah and earlier from Ellie, and I want to move now to getting your perspective of James Thompson's relationship with each of them, beginning with Sarah. As far as you recall, you say in your statement that Sarah started to come out sabbing with you in about 1998, is that right?
Yes, correct.
You became friends with her?
Yeah, so from my memory, we started chatting pretty much as soon as she came out. You know, as I say, there weren't really other women out, so I wanted to encourage the ones who came. And I believe I told her quite soon that I volunteered at that time at a wildlife hospital. And so she was interested in that. And so she then came and started volunteering at the wildlife hospital as well. So we kind of got close quicker because we had two areas that we were doing the same thing in that wasn't just social.
Was Sarah in, if we can call it, you've described that the Croydon Hunt Saboteurs not necessarily a fixed group, but did she mix in that group?
She did mix in that group. There was a certain, because when we were in the field, it was very common for us to be physically attacked by the hunt, the boys, as we called them, which was essentially the thugs there for the hunt, and occasionally the police. It would be a closer knit inner core for those people who regularly had to help each other not end up in hospital. So while Sarah was a very good friend and socialized and all of that, there was a certain element of, these are the people who, you know, will stand by my side and stop me from having my head caved in.
Now, I'm going to ask you about how the relationship with Sarah began. But again, in terms of the group, were there, if I can put it this way, were there lots of single women in the group, or could you just describe at that particular time, just so that we have a picture, please?
So this is something I really wanted to highlight. So I'm very glad you raised it. And I in no way want to suggest that when I felt James was trying to get with me and then instead went with Ellie, it's because Ellie was a second choice, or he'd have rather been with me than Sarah. He didn't care who he was with. He wasn't interested in any of us as more than perhaps a momentary enjoyable moment while he was getting to have sex and get paid for it. When he started with the group, there were no single women until Sarah came out. So he couldn't start a relationship with anyone within the group until Sarah came out. And then he very quickly initiated one. When their relationship was finished and I became single, I believe he tried to initiate one with me. When that didn't work, there were no single women in the group again other than me. So he had to find another option to keep that persona going of dating, not a spy. So I think very much Sarah got targeted immediately as his single option.
And how did that relationship begin? Can you help us with how the relationship began and what your role was in relation to that, please?
So this is one I do have quite a clear memory of. And I know, memories are very pliable things and different people remember things slightly differently. But I remember because we were actually at the wildlife hospital when Sarah spoke to me about him. She was doing I think she did a weekly shift in the hedgehog ward. And I remember she was standing there preparing some food for the hedgehogs. And she kind of said, so I'm thinking about going out with James. And I said, oh, really? And she's like, what do you think? And I said, I think he's a great guy. And yeah, you should go for it. Do it. Absolutely. And she was quite, I don't want to say coy, that's not the word I'm looking for, but you could tell she was kind of quietly excited at the idea of going out with him. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'm really pleased about this. So yeah, I definitely actively encouraged her to go out with him.
In your statement, and the reference is paragraph 4.2, you say that Sarah told you that James had expressed an interest in her.
Yes.
Are you clear sort of who made the first move in terms of expressing interest in the other person?
Yes, 100% she told me he had expressed an interest in her.
All right. Now, we've, of course, heard from Sarah directly about the relationship she had with James Thompson. One of the things that you refer to in your statement, it's paragraph 4.6, is you say that once the relationship had begun, that he didn't ask you anything further about Sarah, and at the time you thought that was a bit odd. I'm going to read the sentence. It said, James didn't ask me questions about Sarah during the period he was deployed. He never really spoke about her. In hindsight, I should have thought that odd, but he was a private person. And so,
yes.
What about a lot later, after his deployment ends? Did he ever talk about Sarah after that, in that later period?
He didn't, but Sarah and I weren't in touch by that point. So that wasn't unusual. If I had still been in contact with her and bringing her up and he had avoided it, that would have seemed unusual. In fact, it did seem unusual to me that there were other people who I was in contact with and he would ask about them and we would talk about them. But then when it came to organising a meetup, he wouldn't. He would only meet up with me. But Sarah, because she and I were no longer in contact, it didn't seem unusual.
Were you able to listen to any of Sarah's evidence to the inquiry recently? Did you? Now, one of the things that you will recall is that when James Thompson brings that relationship to the end, you'll remember Sarah describing how he hands over a letter and the content of that letter. Now, at the time, did you know anything about that at the time? Not now.
I remember her being, I don't want to say she was upset when she was talking to me, but you know when somebody's breathless when they're talking because something's obviously impacting them? I remember her talking to me and being quite breathless and saying how, yeah, he'd spoken to her about some things and they weren't together, but that I remember she said to me, we had this awkward conversation with it being James where he said to him, but, you know, I feel like, you know, even if we're not together, we're soulmates. Do you feel the same way? And he went, well, yes. And I don't remember her giving me any detail about what he told her, but that they'd had this conversation. They weren't continuing the relationship, but, you know, she felt they were soulmates and he'd said awkwardly when pushed on it that, yes, he felt the same.
Finally, in relation to Sarah, could you just help us with what you saw from your perspective of how she changed when that relationship came to an end at the time of the letter? Was it visible, obvious, or not particularly from your perspective?
From my perspective, she seemed a little bit smaller, if you know what I mean. She shrunk a little bit. Probably a little bit less bubbly. Yeah, like she wouldn't talk about it a great deal. I realize now, out of respect for what he claimed had happened to him, but she just seemed a little bit smaller in person.
I want to move on to ask you some questions about Ellie. And of course, we've just heard evidence from Ellie. Mm-hmm. Is it right that Sarah was a little older than you? Is that right? But Ellie was about the same. Ellie was about the same age.
Ellie and I were very similar in age. Okay. Sarah was older, and I remember supposedly James being a couple of years younger than her.
You met Ellie volunteering at the Wildlife Hospital?
Yes.
And was this about 1999, about that time?
Yes, I would have met her in 1999. We wouldn't have been really close until later in that year, because when I first met her, I had started working at the hospital, but in the kind of office side of things. And we both did a course, essentially, at the Wildlife Hospital on direct care, triage, things like that, so that we could assist with medical stuff. And so I met her I'd seen her at the hospital, but we hadn't really engaged until we both did that course. And then it was a little while after that she started part-time as direct animal care, and my role at a very similar time transitioned to part-time animal care.
And you became housemates?
We became housemates So we became housemates while at the wildlife hospital in what was kind of like a share house situation, in that we were living in a house which I believe was owned by a relative of our boss. And we were working 2 nights on, which meant you were staying at the wildlife hospital, 2 nights off, and 2 nights on rescue. And so the 3 of us, myself, Ellie, and our boss, would rotate through those roles. So 2 nights out of every 6, I would be at the wildlife hospital. And 2 nights out of every 6, I would be at home with Ellie. And 2 nights out of every 6, I would be at home with my boss. So even though we were living together, we weren't at home together all the time.
Ellie described.
Sorry?
Ellie described the unwanted sexual advances from senior colleague there.
Yes.
And is it right that both of you ended up moving into your mother's house together with
Yes.
Ellie's sister, I think?
Correct. So we moved in while probate was ongoing, because when Ellie said she was leaving the wildlife hospital, he told her that she didn't have a place to live. And I hadn't actually intended, I was still working at the wildlife hospital at the time. I hadn't intended to move into my mother's house because I really didn't want to be there, to be honest. It wasn't a great place for me to be mental health wise, but he literally threw her out on the street. And just before, not long before Ellie left the wildlife hospital, her sister had moved into the share house with us as well. So he essentially was going to throw both Ellie and her sister out on the street. And they had, I mean, we got paid well below legal minimum wage, and they would not have been able to find somewhere to live.
I want to move to, and you refer to this at paragraph 7.5, so that's page 11 in your statement, where you say halfway down that paragraph, as I remember, referring to James Thompson, he asked me how old Ellie was, and I told him she was the same age as me, which would have been 21 at the time in early 2001. At the time, you remember that now, that he asked how old Ellie was. Why did that stick in your memory after all these years?
Because, I mean, the whole conversation stuck in my memory because it came out of nowhere. But because he then went on to say, do you think she'd be up for dating, you know, I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but an oldie like me. So he'd kind of asked it in relation to, well, I'm like recognizing the fact that he was a fair bit older. Do I think she would be interested?
What did you say at the time, knowing what you did then?
I think I said, oh, I don't know, I can ask her. Because I think he'd met her once, never spoke a word to her that I remember, and hadn't ever mentioned her again up till that point.
And just continuing in your statement to that paragraph, you say, I told Ellie that he was a great guy and that I thought they would get along well, and was happy that they began dating. In this way, I directly set Ellie up with James.
Yeah.
How do you feel now, knowing what you do, about your role, if I can put it in that way, in both Sarah and Ellie's relationship with James Thompson?
I mean, obviously, Sarah, I put in a good word. But with Ellie, not only did I directly set her up with him, she wouldn't have met him any other way. He wouldn't have targeted her if she wasn't my friend. And essentially, I destroyed my friend's trust in men and ability to date. So I struggle quite hard with that.
may I move to a different topic? And what I want to ask you about is James Thompson's. So I am about to move to a separate topic. I see the time. I wonder whether this is a convenient moment to have a short break. So I'm in your hands.
Certainly. Do we need 10 minutes or 15?
I'd imagine 10 is sufficient.
10, right. We have a break for the shorthand writers who have, as you would appreciate, a busy time when they're recording oral evidence. We'll all have a break of 10 minutes.
No problem.
All rise.
Wendy, I'd like to return to the Croydon Hunt Saboteurs group, and in particular, James Thompson's level of participation in that group and his interaction with the others in it. As a general question, could I ask how you would describe James Thompson's engagement in animal rights activism? How involved was he at the time?
He was certainly very involved with coming to things. He was certainly one of the people who would be likely to be there when we would be regularly attacked. Interestingly, when I've tried to think about this, I don't remember him actually taking any useful steps to prevent a kill. So, for example, one of the things that you could do as a SAB, even if you didn't have a lot of other skills, was if a fox broke, you'd spray the ground where the fox had passed with citronella, which would stop the hounds following the scent. I know it was said the other day that we sprayed on the hounds. That's actually incorrect. The idea was to spray where the fox had run in order for them to come to a stop on the trail. That was something you could do even if you had no other skills. So some of the other skills would be mimicking the huntsman's voice calls to call the dogs away, things like that. I don't remember James ever doing anything like that. And that's not to say he never did, because obviously my focus wasn't on checking what the other SABs were doing. In moments like that, you were really focused on getting that animal away alive. But he certainly didn't carry citronella spray for that purpose, which I, in hindsight, was odd.
Could you help us with how often violence erupted? So you've described during hunt season, almost every weekend, out hunt sabbing. But how often would that turn into a violent confrontation?
Partly it would depend on which hunt we ended up attending, which would depend on the information that we ended up getting, and who the huntsman was. So quite often, if we were to attend the Burstow, their huntsman was particularly violent himself and would regularly have people there to attack us, but would also regularly attack us himself. So I guess you'd kind of have a bit of an idea when you turned up for the day if you were likely to get attacked or not. I would say actually getting attacked was regular, but wherever we could, we would obviously run and not become engaged. Because at the end of the day, if we became engaged in a physical altercation, either we would get arrested, no matter the fact that we weren't starting something, or we would have to leave the area. And then there would be nobody to stop them killing. So at all costs, we would try to avoid that. But certainly there were many, many occasions where it was not possible to avoid that.
Can you remember any occasion in particular where James Thompson was involved in the violence?
Yes, I remember two very specific occasions. One, which I don't believe I've seen any reports on, but I remember he was there that day, where we'd come to a gate at the bottom of a field that was open. And bear in mind, sometimes you're going onto private land. Trespass is a civil offence. So we'd go onto the land, see what happens. The police were at the gate at the bottom of the field. It was a sloped field. The police were at the gate, and we kind of looked at them and they just didn't react. So we walked through the gate, the open gate, went up the field where the hunt had just gone, at which point the hunt turned around, and this was all on horseback, so the huntsman and the whippers in. The field usually didn't have a clue what was going on in regards to anything. They were just paying people who thought it was a jolly good trot across the countryside. They came back down the hill, and so we turned around because it was very obvious they were coming with malicious intent. We turned around to exit the field, and the police shut the gate. And when we tried to climb over the gate, they pushed us back into the field, at which point the men on horses started striking us with their whips. And I remember being hit on the head with a brass-ended whip, which, excuse my French, bloody hurts. And I know James was present for that. And that was literally just a whipping on that occasion. The only thing we could do was run up the field and try and escape into the woods.
You said there were a couple of examples you wanted to mention. What was the other one?
Yes. The other one, which James does bring up because he claims he was injured at the event, but he brings up part of it, was we'd lost the hunt. So sometimes that happened, we were on foot, they were on horseback. Sometimes we would lose them. And we were just walking through the countryside along a dirt track. So you wouldn't bring a normal car down it. We weren't near the road, but there was a dirt track, and we heard vehicles. And we stopped and looked, and there was 2 open back vehicles hurtling towards us, and there were several men in the back of each with, I could see straight away golf clubs and bats. I think somebody may have had a crowbar, but I can't be entirely sure. But they had come with the purpose of attacking us with weapons. So somebody yelled, grab branches, stick together, try and defend yourselves. They jumped out the vehicles and they started laying into us effectively. I don't remember seeing James during the incident because quite early on what happened was I was struck with a golf club, and I don't know if I was momentarily knocked out, but I was on the ground and I was being kicked in the face by a man who was also on the ground, and our legs were kind of tangled up, and I was trying to kick at him. And he kicked me in the face and ended up leaving an imprint on my face. And then I got up and somebody yelled, run, or retreat. I think it was retreat. And everyone just bolted. And the reason I know James was there for that incident, other than that he reports on it, was, as would often be the case when there was any kind of violence towards us, the police were looking for us. And we'd heard that over the radio. And so James went, everybody stay here. I'll go and get my car and get us out. And he drove off. He ran off, came back maybe an hour later with his goatee beard shaved off and his hair cut, so he'd had long hair. And he snuck us all into the back of his car and drove us out the area.
Now, you said he'd referred to it in his statement, and the reference, we didn't turn it up, but it's paragraph 254 of his statement, page 97. Wendy, I'm just going to read a short extract from it. He says, I've been referred to the file note at MPS 001577, which refers to me sustaining bruising to my jaw, upper and lower back and legs during hunt saboteur activity on the 21st of November 1998. I remember this incident because I was attacked during a hunt sab and struck with a golf club. And so this is the incident that you've just described.
Correct, yes.
And so in terms of both those examples that you've given us, it describes James Thompson as on the receiving end of violence.
Honestly, any time I saw him or was involved with him in a physical altercation, he was defending himself the same as we were. I believe the reason for that is that had he started violence out sabbing, it would have stood out like a sore thumb, because as I say, if there was a fight, we could no longer be there to stop animals being killed. So if somebody came out and just started a fight, what the hell are you doing here?
All right. And just following on from that, you said, well, it was stick out like a sore thumb if he'd started the violence, if he'd instigated it. Could you help us with, at the time, how the others in the group, in the Croydon Hunt Saboteurs, how did they treat, from your perspective, James Thompson? Was he a trusted friend, a member of the inner circle, or someone that was on the periphery seen with suspicion? Could you just help us with how others in the group saw him as far as you were aware?
He was definitely a member of the inner circle. So you had, as I said earlier, you had the people who would keep up, who were usually the ones who were there when we were attacked, because we were the ones there who could actually disrupt the kill. So they wanted to get us out of the way. He was one of those. And then you also had the people who would get on socially, but wouldn't be there at the core of activities, such as Sarah. James was on both sides of that, and so was I, and so were maybe 4 others, where you were both back to back fighting for yourselves and each other, and you got on socially and would go out outside of sabbing. So he was one of those core people who, you know, was part of both of those things.
Wendy, I'm going to move on now to look at some of his specific intelligence reports. I'm not going to refer to all of them, but I would like to ask you some questions about some of them. And the first one, so it's at your tab B1, it is MPS 0001211. And I wonder if that could please be shown on the screen. So we can see, and this is typical of the report that I know that you have seen, Wendy. So we have the date the information was obtained from source. So here, just to orientate ourselves, 20th of July 1998. Then there's a typing date a few days later, the 24th of July. Then we have magenta triangle, James Thompson's code name, and the title of this one is Hunt Sab Association AGM. So it's the Hunt Saboteur Association Annual General Meeting. We can see from the first paragraph that this was something that took place on the 18th of July 1998 at the Red Rose Club in Finsbury Park. Was that a members only meeting? Was that a public meeting? Could you just help us with how exclusive this particular event was?
I mean, you didn't have to register to go. You probably wouldn't know about it if you weren't involved with hunt sabotage. But sometimes there would be speakers who would come in who weren't involved in hunt sabotage. It wasn't like somebody checked your ID on the door.
And we can see, and we needn't read the details of the second paragraph, but the discussion about, for example, their finances, for example. Okay. Could I ask you to turn to the next page, please? Or we're going to bring up the next page on the screen. And again, I'm not going to be asking you about all the detail of this, but can you see the last main paragraph? Just going to read that out for the record, and then I'm just going to ask you some questions about it. It says, on behalf of the Kent SABs, Privacy, supported by video evidence, drew attention to the difficulties they encountered in Kent last year from the Hunt Boys and the Blue Meanies, reference to the police, and asked for assistance from other groups during the coming season. Privacy also claimed that the local constabulary had threatened him with conspiracy charges if he engineered the assistance of London SABs this year. And then this. Needless to say that during the course of the coming season, both Brixton and Croydon will be dispatching their finest ambassadors to Kent to right the terrible wrongs visited upon their Kent colleagues. And was this a reference to members of the Croydon Hunt Saboteurs and the Brixton Hunt Saboteurs helping similar groups in Kent? Is that a reference to that?
I mean, without memory of that specific example, if a group which had a lower number of members in general had been attacked several times, they would ask for support in numbers. So they would ask people to show their support by, and sometimes it, you know, in order to get that support, it could be people coming from far afield just so that they had some support. It wasn't just three of them constantly getting beaten up by, you know, the boys on that hunt because they could, because there was nothing they could do about it.
Now, again,
so physically being there just to, you know, give strength in numbers, essentially.
And again, if we look at the date of the report, so July 1998, would you have been, is it 18 at about this time?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
And we can see at the bottom of the report, it says the following Hunt Sabs were present at the meeting, and then it says Croydon, and then there's a reference, can you see, to L4, but also your name, Wendy?
Yes.
Okay. In relation to L4, could you help us with how well you knew L4?
Very well. He was also a very close friend.
What about his relationship with James Thompson? How close?
Again, same thing. We were, you know, we were part of both the social people who got along as a group and the close-knit people who would have to stand back to back and defend ourselves together. So yes, suffice to say they were very close friends. I would say that in the same way that as soon as I was single and my mother was terminally ill, James inserted himself more firmly into my life. He did the same with L4 after his life-altering attempted murder.
We will come on to that particular topic, but just staying with this report, I wonder if we could now turn to the page 3, because, and we can see on page 3, there's a list of the various Hunt Sab groups. And can you see West London? And then there's the name Thomas Frampton.
Yes.
Is that a name that you knew at the time?
At the time, I would say no, I did not know that name. I did not know that person as that name.
Did you, at the time, have any interaction at all with Thomas Frampton?
I know now, as we're speaking about that person, I met them a couple of times, but I was not a close associate. I was not a friend. I did not see them in any kind of form of social capacity.
Who do you mean by them?
The person I now know as Thomas Frampton.
Okay. And did you ever see him in the company of any of his partners at all?
I don't know if I saw him in the company of his partners. As I say, I recollect meeting him. I did not recollect meeting his partner until I did recently see a photograph, and I do believe I would have met her in much the same capacity. I would have met her at a meeting. I don't know her.
Well, the inquiry is looking at undercover officer HN26, whose cover name was Christine Green, and when she began a relationship with Thomas Frampton. But in terms of their relationship, when it began, is it fair to say that you're unable to assist on that particular topic?
Honestly, on that topic, on those individuals, I don't have any information I can provide you with.
Please could we move to another report? So it's at your tab B2. It is MPS 0247867. This is a report dated 24th of August 1998. So again, you were 18 at the time that this report was produced. We can see from the title, Inaugural Cubbing Meeting of the Old Burstow Hunt. And it describes in paragraph 1 the Croydon Hunt saboteurs arriving at the kennels in relation to a particular hunt. Mm-hmm. But what I want to ask you about is the sentence at the end of the first numbered paragraph. Amongst the saboteurs were L4, Privacy Wendy, and Privacy from Croydon. Also present were Young Privacy, SNU, surname unknown, and Privacy from Liverpool. And then it says L1 and L2. You've already told us that L4 was a good friend of yours. May I ask about L1 and L2? Wendy, you have, I think, been provided with a cipher that, and I'm not going to ask you to say their real names, but you have been provided with a cipher who gives you the real names of L1 and L2. So those two individuals, it's the same question. Did you know them? Were you friends with them? Could you help us with your relationship with L1 and L2 at this time?
Yes, I was very good friends with them. Same scenario. They would be present at times where I would be attacked and relying partly on the people around me to have my back. And they were also people I enjoyed socializing with. So they were part of a core group of friends as well.
What about James Thompson's relationship with them? So it's the same question, but from James Thompson's perspective, did he know them? Was he friends with them, or are you able?
Yes, it would be the same scenario where, I guess all that applies to myself and L4, other than when it intensified with me when I was single, and it intensified with L4 after he was run down. James Thompson's friendship with them was a solid one. We might socialize outside of sabbing, but I wouldn't have expected them to have one-on-ones with him or anything like that. We'd be socializing as a group.
Now, he is not referred to in this report, but can I take this opportunity to ask you about someone else who we are calling L3?
Yes.
And in relation to L3, he was L2's brother.
Yes.
And the same question first about your relationship with, if any, with L3. Was he a friend? Did you know him?
Yes, absolutely. Same scenario. Part of that close-knit group. I will say L1 and L2 were not, and L3 were not present when I joined the Croydon Hunt Saboteurs, and when James Thompson joined. L1 and L2 came along a little bit later, and then L3 a little bit after that. So, I knew James better than most people, even those that I was close with.
And your relationship with L3 similar to James Thompson's relationship with him?
I mean, I can't answer that question on his behalf, but from my perspective, we were part of that close-knit group of friends who would, out on the hunt, often have to defend ourselves side by side.
But also in the same social group, so after the hunt, going for drinks
Yes,
afterwards, for
absolutely,
example.
yeah.
All right. I would like to ask you about another report. Sir, it is at your tab B4. It is MPS 001923. Wendy, you can see the date of this report, 29th of March 1999, so you would have been 19 at the time?
Correct.
And I'm going to read the entirety of the report, and I'm just going to ask you some questions about it. Croydon Sab's Privacy Sanctuary. The Croydon Hunt saboteurs are forging close ties with the Privacy Animal Sanctuary in and the locations given. Wendy, the girlfriend of Privacy, has just started working at the sanctuary as a full-time fundraiser, while Sarah is also engaged there as a part-time nurse. In the near future, the entire SAB group will be attending the sanctuary to assist in the construction of a duck pond. Now, my first question is in terms of the accuracy of this report. It's a short report. Is it accurate?
No. There's several areas where it's inaccurate. Firstly, Sarah was a volunteer at the hospital. She was never employed there. At this time, it was probably around the time that Ellie was employed as a part-time, you could call her a nurse. She was providing direct care to the animals. Sarah, as she mentioned, was not doing that. I believe that he deliberately lied in that report to justify any further contact with Sarah. The second thing that's incorrect is there was never a plan for the entire SAB group to attend. Most people probably knew I worked with animals, possibly knew I worked at a hospital. There was certainly never any talk about the entire SAB group attending. I wouldn't have invited the entire SAB group to attend. It was a handful of individuals who were, closer associates and closer friends who came to do that.
The inaccuracies you've described is one point, but I want to ask you about a further point, and it's a more general one. What is your reaction now to reading an intelligence report by an undercover officer about plans to build a duck pond at an animal sanctuary?
I mean, I think it reflects fairly badly on any claims that they're making that they were there to intercept illegal activity or threats to the public or processes, because, he was literally in his reports telling them that the activities we were undertaking was building a duck pond. It's not really a threat to public security.
I want to also ask you about the tone of the reporting. And in asking you this question, please could we turn to MPS 002323. So it's your tab B6. This report from August 1999, so you're 19 at the time this report's produced.
Yes.
And it is in relation to Surrey Fighting for Animals. And we can see it begins at the monthly meeting of Surrey Fighting for Animals attracted the usual mix of activists and fluffies, with a total turnout of about 30, some of whom had come to listen to the words of wisdom of guest speaker Robin Webb. This distinction between activists and fluffies, do you understand what is meant by that? And what is your reaction to seeing it in a report, please?
Yes, I do understand what is meant by that. It's a derogatory way of referring to people who wouldn't be involved in direct action. So perhaps they might go to a protest or run a stall, but they wouldn't go out hunt sabbing, for example. they were fluffy.
The report goes on. The usual shambolic meeting started with a resume of the financial situation, which revealed total reserves of £70. The main bone of contention was the continued donation of £250 a month to the Hillgrove campaign, Privacy's favourite cause, whilst local causes, such as the Privacy Wildlife Hospital, promoted by Wendy, remained bereft of financial aid. In continuance of the best AR traditions, no decisions were made as to future donations. So the reference to the usual shambolic meeting and what is described in relation to donations. What was your reaction when you first read this report in terms of the tone that's used?
I felt it was unsurprisingly derogatory. It was almost, he sounds bitter when he's talking about us. It's all just theatre. Everything he says is just creating theatre. I can't say I remember every word at every meeting I've ever been to, but I do know that at one of the meetings of Sorry Fighting for Animals, I did give a talk about the hospital because people were interested. Obviously, it was a wildlife hospital. We dealt with animals who were regularly killed for sport. And so he's obviously taken that as a way to suggest there's division in place because I wanted money, which I don't recall that being the case at all. I don't remember there being arguments over where a group chose to donate their money to.
There's a particular point in this report. It's the penultimate paragraph where James Thompson refers to something in particular that happens in the meeting. And again, I'll read it. It's Privacy Snoo, so surname unknown, from Crowborough, revealed that she had obtained the home address of a director of a firm that makes and supplies equipment for use in vivisection. The director lives in the Sevenoaks area, and P for Privacy wanted to know if everyone thought a home visit would be a good idea. She was promptly told to shut up as it was an open meeting and she had now ruined her own good work, much wailing and gnashing of teeth. Now, the reference to home visits, is that something, to your knowledge, that James Thompson participated in at all?
I think he did, but certainly not regularly. It's not something that springs to mind when I think about his activities. I think he did attend, perhaps once or twice.
Now, I'm not asking you to name names, but was home visits a thing that was done by certain members of the Croydon Hunt Saboteurs?
I mean, it wasn't done in the way that report suggested, where we're not talking about this in front of people because something dodgy is planned. A home visit would be something where there was knowledge of where an employee lived. And as far as I was concerned, in my limited experience with them, it was about going and making sure the neighbours knew where their neighbour worked. It was a form of, I suppose, advocacy as much as anything, in that you didn't want people to be able to hide what they were doing from their neighbours. And so we would go and, well, as I say, I only also attended, I think on one occasion, for home visits, where we just went and yelled that they worked at an animal abusing company.
And any of the occasions that you yourself saw, was there any sort of criminal damage? I don't know, throwing a brick at a window, anything like that over and above the shouting that you've described?
No, nothing at all. As I say, the goal, as far as I was aware and as far as I experienced, was to make sure that their neighbours knew that they were torturing animals for a living.
Before we leave this report, may I just read onto the record the last paragraph. Robin Webb then gave his speech, which was excellent, but largely wasted on those present. Webb was then subjected to an hour of the most moronic questioning he may ever have had to face, and it is unlikely he will darken the SUFA doorstep again. Again, may I get your comment on the sort of tone and the effect it has on you to read that description of a meeting that you attended, please?
Again, it just feels like everything he's saying is for theatrical effect, that he's writing something for his colleagues to read and chat about. This isn't reporting on criminal activity, proposed criminal activity, anything of value whatsoever. It's basically just trying to find ways to belittle, feel superior, and make jokes. There doesn't seem to be any relevance to it. That's what confuses me the most, is all money, time, and effort that's gone into these undercover officers' deployments. There doesn't seem to be any reason for it.
Wendy, I just want to ask you about two more reports, and then we'll move on. And the next report is, sir, at your tab B7. It is MPS 003033. This report is dated the 21st of February 2000, and it is about an individual whose name has been covered by a privacy box there. But it is really the penultimate paragraph I want to ask you about, because it says, in relation to this person, he is presently residing with Privacy and Wendy at their address in, and it says privacy, because your address is under those privacy boxes.
Yes.
He also spends considerable time at his girlfriend's flat in Purley. Again, how did you feel when you read an intelligence report about who was living at your home address?
Not surprised by the time I saw these reports, because it had become obvious that they didn't have anything of quality to report. So what else did he have to talk about other than who was sleeping with who and who was living with who? It didn't particularly bother me. That side of his reporting didn't bother me, because I just felt it highlighted what utter rubbish the whole thing was.
How was he able to report on who was living with who was sleeping with who? How did he?
Because he was a friend, and so friends know who's having a relationship with their friends and who's moved in with their friends, what troubles their friends are having in said relationships. They're privy to private information about the lives of the people who trust them.
Last report, so it's behind your tab B9. It is MPS 003413. Wendy, you spoke earlier in your evidence about breaking up with your partner in 2000, and I think this report is related to that.
Yes.
And so if we look at the second paragraph, Privacy, the heart and soul of the group, has recently split up with his girlfriend, Wendy. She has moved out of their flat in, it says Privacy, but it's the address, yes? And has returned to the mother's address in Privacy. Privacy is distraught at her departure, and the report goes on. Again, what was your reaction to reading a report on the breakdown of your relationship at the age of 20?
Yes, 20, correct. This one did make me angry and hurt, because I spoke to him quite a bit during the time that my relationship was breaking down and after it had broken down. And he was very supportive of me leaving the relationship. And yet it's just another anecdote for him to put down because he doesn't have anything else to talk about.
Thank you. Could we take the report down, please? Wendy, I want to ask you now about something that's been given the name Operation Lime.
Yes.
Operation Lime arose out of an incident that you have already touched upon. It was the 1st of September 2000 when L4 was injured when a Land Rover belonging to the Surrey and Burstow Hunt ran him over.
Yes.
And it was believed that someone that we've given the cipher L5 may have been the driver of that particular vehicle. Okay? Were you there at that particular event where he was run over?
I wasn't, no.
Did word quickly reach you, though, that he had been run over?
Yes, almost immediately.
Would it be fair to say that everyone in the group, word spread quickly and everyone in the group knew about it very quickly?
I don't know how quickly everyone knew about it. Obviously, the priority was him. He was in an extremely, extremely bad way. I can't say how quickly everyone knew about it. I was told about it very quickly. And by very quickly, I mean that day. And I believe James was also told about it that day. I can't say how quickly other people were.
Now, I want to distinguish between talking about something and doing something. But first, yes. Talking about something. Was there talk of reprisals, revenge afterwards that you witnessed?
Absolutely never in my presence, and never that I ever heard any inkling about. And I will say that this was, L5 was a gentleman who, while this was ongoing and he was in fact being charged with, I think it was grievous bodily harm with intent to kill, he was coming out on the hunts and standing opposite us doing this. And for those who just have audio, he was motioning, turning a steering wheel at us. So this was not a man who felt he had anything to fear from us. In fact, he was threatening us still.
We've also heard about a trial collapsing. After that trial, was there any talk about, well, we'll take the law into our own hands, we'll get revenge or reprisals after that?
The only talk I heard and was part of after that trial collapsed was, oh my God, what's going to happen with L4? This is going to kill him. How do we support him? What can we do?
Now, you have read James Thompson's statement that he's given to the inquiry.
I have.
And in that statement, he describes a trip to France in January 2001,
yes,
where he says, essentially, he intercepts a plot to obtain a gun, bullets, and appears to be gunpowder in France, that he manages to engineer it so that those items look as though they've been stolen from his car, and the plot that was to seek revenge for what happened to L4 against L5 never happened. So essentially, he stops a murder plot from reaching its intended target. Now, in
Yes,
relation
that's
to
what he says, yes.
on that particular trip, we've heard from Sarah that she joined James Thompson, but also L3 in France sometime into that trip. And so when she came back from France and when James Thompson and L3 returned to France, did you have any conversation with either of them, James Thompson, L3 or Sarah, about what they got up to in France?
They drank wine, and the only other conversation I remember with James was because my mother was very ill, about to die at that time. He said he had to go to France. He wouldn't be able to be there for a few days for me, and he was thinking of me. And I remember talking to Sarah when she got back and just said, oh, it was really nice. They had a really nice time. It was quite relaxing.
Was there any discussion or anything that you picked up on at the time that suggested that something had happened in France that wasn't related to drinking wine?
Absolutely nothing.
You were there, not in France, but you were there at the time interacting with L1, L2, L3, L4 and James Thompson.
Correct.
And you saw all of them regularly, yes? Around about this time?
At that time, I wasn't seeing them as regularly as normal, in that I was obviously engrossed in what was happening to my mother at the very beginning of 2001. But up until that point, I had been seeing them. So up to the end of 2000, I had been seeing them just as regularly. And I would say I was as close, if not closer, to L4 than James was. And there was certainly never anything discussed or mentioned or even hinted with me. And the same from L1, L2, and L3. Never anything.
So what's your reaction to reading this explanation?
The second I read it, my jaw hit the floor. And I knew straight away it was utter crap. I remembered straight away that Sarah had met them. And I knew it was that trip because of all of the things that were happening in my life around that time. And I remember thinking how ridiculous the entire thing was, that I couldn't believe that at the time the rest of the police bought into it. Because putting aside entirely my knowledge personally of the other individuals involved and my 100% knowledge in my heart that they would never have been part of something like that, it was the dumbest plot I could have conceived. If you are an animal rights activist supposedly involved in such extremist activity that you're going to murder someone, why would you drive to France to buy a gun from a stranger to drive it back through customs to the UK? There are illegal firearms available in the UK, I'm pretty sure. I haven't purchased one myself, but I'm pretty sure that if that had been something someone wanted to do, they wouldn't have contacted a stranger in France and risked customs, dealing with strangers, and multiple people being involved in a murder plot.
When James Thompson ended his deployment, and could you first describe how that affected your relationship? Because the inquiry has looked at a number of undercover officers when their deployment ends, but his contact continues with you. Could you just
Yes.
help us with the impact of his deployment ending, how you remember it at the time, how significant it was at the time?
Obviously, I was really upset for Ellie because she was very upset. From my perspective personally, I remember going out for a leaving dinner with him. I think, I'm not sure who else, but I remember L3 was there, and one or two others. And we went out for his goodbye dinner. And I remember it because afterwards, L3 and I were talking, and we said it's really sad because it feels like that's a big part of the group gone now. And it kind of made us, when you've been so close through having to, as I say, literally have each other's backs, it's a real hit when somebody leaves. And we knew he didn't want to leave. You know, he wanted to be close to his kids, but he didn't want to leave us and the UK and Ellie. And so it wasn't a happy send-off because he wasn't happy and we weren't happy and Ellie wasn't happy.
You say in your statement that your friendship was maintained with James Thompson through emails, phone calls, and sometimes meeting up with him long after his deployment ended.
Yes.
Now, you have exhibited some of those emails. We're not going to go through all of them. We're just going to use a few examples. But they are, the tone of them is emails ending with lots of love, kisses, and plans to meet up at various stages over the years, yes?
Yes.
And sometimes you were able to meet up physically with James Thompson, otherwise, other times it didn't happen. But you say that on one occasion that he even met your then partner on one visit. Could you just help us with that and when that happened?
Yeah, so I will just say as well, just touching on, you said sometimes it happened, sometimes it didn't. The only times I went back to the UK that I didn't meet up with him was 2016, which was obviously after the inquiry had started. And in 2006, where I came back because a very close friend of both of ours was getting married. So he couldn't meet up with me because obviously he didn't want to go to the wedding. And if he met with me, he didn't have an excuse to not go to the wedding. This is in hindsight, of course. But other than that, I met up with him every time I returned to the UK. When I went over with my partner at the time, who was Australian, we went, as I often did when I met James on these visits, we went to one of the all-you-can-eat vegetarian buffets in London. And he met him there. And I believe he also came to L4's house when I went there with my partner.
Now, let's have a look at a couple of examples. So it's behind your tab A2. It is UCPI 38209. And I'm going to ask, please, if the page 24 could be put up on screen. So this is an email from James Thompson to you on the 24th of November 2006. So this is 5 years after his deployment ended. The subject, hello, dear Wendy. Firstly, please note the formality of that first line so there's no question of any yo Jim Bobs or similar coming back to me. That said, how the hell are you? I obviously caught up on the progress of your privacy skills when I saw Ellie. You sadly neglected to tell me about all that when we spoke on the phone. Is it officially your career yet? More importantly, I believe you're supposed to make yourselves available for your privacy colleagues to try things out on. And then this, presumably there must be photos, but you've neglected to send them over. Did you ever send James Thompson photographs of yourself at any point?
I actually think I might have on that occasion. Just to be clear, these were not sexual photos. I think I might have, after that email, sent him a photo. It's relevant to the redacted section, and it was kind of a bit of a jokey thing. That would have been the only time, though.
Now, if we look a bit further down in that email, he says this, more relevantly, have you got L4's address? I thought I'd be able to find him still last time I was over, but couldn't remember the way. Most embarrassing. So a postcode or something to stick in a sat-nav might be helpful. Now, at the time, you provided L4's address in response, didn't you?
I did.
How do you feel about that now, knowing that he was an undercover officer?
It haunts me. I cannot begin to imagine why he wanted that address. His deployment had ended, yet he was still working for the Metropolitan Police. To me, it just reaffirms my belief that he was staying in touch with me because I remained useful on getting information. I do not accept that information was not to be passed to the police. There is absolutely no reason why he would have required L4's address. And in fact, I confirmed at the time, I remember confirming with L4 whether he had gone there, and he had not.
I'm going to ask if we could please turn up page 20. And Wendy, I'm not going to go into the detail of all of these emails because there are just a couple of particular points I want to ask you about. But if you can see page 20, towards the top of the page, it's an email to you from James Thompson on the 14th of September 2009. And it's what he says at the end. So, love, James, kiss, P.S. Tell Ellie she still owes me an E. The really short one that just kept saying damn didn't count. And where are the photos? Now, presumably, still owes me an E, saying she still owes me an email.
Yes.
What did you understand that James Thompson was referring to when he asks, where are the photos?
At that point, I didn't know that he was asking for photos of her in lingerie. I just thought they must have had a conversation about somewhere we'd been or something that had happened, and Ellie had said, oh, I'll send you some pics, and then hadn't. Listening to the number of times he harassed her for sexy photos during her evidence earlier was actually repulsive. To me, that was sexual harassment by a dirty old man who wanted to get his jollies off with looking at photos of a younger woman he had tricked into a sexual relationship. I found it absolutely repulsive.
What was your reaction on the subject of messages that James Thompson sent to Ellie? What was your reaction when you discovered that in 2017 he had asked for the address, I think, that you were sharing at the time with Ellie? What was your reaction to James Thompson asking for that address in 2017?
At the time, I think I said, oh, is he going to send something? And she said, I don't know. He just asked for the address. And I didn't really think any more of it, because why would I at the time?
Thank you. We can take the emails off of screen. I want to now turn to a topic that you've already referred to a little bit, and it's in relation to going back to a property purchase. After your mother passed away, at the time when proceedings were going through probate, you identified a property that you wanted to move into. Is that right?
Correct. So I knew the contents of my mother's will. I knew the executor of her will, which was her best friend. And obviously I knew the solicitor, and the solicitor said, look, it's an easy will. It's not contested. It should just take a few weeks. So if you want to start looking at houses now, you should be able to do that. And he said, technically, probate can take up to 6 months, but that's only for really complicated scenarios, usually where there's multiple challenges. So you should be okay to start looking.
And so at the time, how long did this process take?
It took 6 months to the day.
And at the time, obviously following your mother's death, but what were you thinking about the process and how were you feeling at the time?
I was getting extremely anxious. I had found a property that I loved, that I walked into and I felt at home in. I couldn't afford to keep my mother's property. That wasn't an option. That had to be sold. So I was really, it felt like something positive could happen in regards to I'd found a home I actually wanted to be in, that was suitable, that was close to everything I needed to be close to. And I had made an offer, and it was a new build from a small building firm. So the offer was, the builders were selling the property. They'd accepted my offer on the basis that it was waiting for probate. As probate took longer and longer, and we didn't have any answers as to why, the builders started saying, we can't hold this property for you. We've got multiple other buyers we could be selling this to. The next door neighbors, it was a semi-detached property. Neighbors had already bought and moved in this time. I was going to lose the property.
So was all this in about 2001?
Correct.
So that's what happened in 2001. And then all these years later, one of the documents that's disclosed to you, so it's at tab 10, it is MPS 0719-701. So that happened in 2001. And then this document was disclosed to you, and it's described as magenta triangle, extraction, chronology, and timetable. And if we could turn, please, to page 2. And on page 2, it's section C. Wendy recently moved into an address the address is redacted, which she has bought following the death of her mother. Attempts to disrupt this purchase having failed, it is impossible to predict how long she might remain here. What was your reaction when you read that for the first time?
I read it about another 10 times. It was one of those heart-stopping moments. I believe I WhatsApp messaged one of the lawyers and went, have you seen this? And they were equally shocked. And immediately I started thinking back to that time and how odd it was, how long the process had taken for probate, and how I kept going to the solicitor and asking what was happening. And he said he had no idea. There were no updates. He was chasing. my mother's best friend, who was the executor of the will, who was also an estate agent, had started showing me other properties and trying to persuade me to buy another property. So I'm thinking, was she in on it somehow? Was my solicitor in on it somehow? Did they contact the probate office and interfere with probate and just tell them to put it at the bottom of the pile? How deep did this go, and how high up was it approved? Who approved this?
James Thompson was asked about this, and in his statement, we didn't turn it up, but it's paragraph 349, he stated, "I have no recollection of what this is and cannot assist the inquiry." So James Thompson has been referred to what we have on screen, and his explanation in his statement is that he has no recollection of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think every word out of his mouth is a lie. And as one of his supervisors pointed out, he tells the minimum amount of truth when he has no other choice at all times.
May I turn to your reaction to the way in which James Thompson's managers dealt with him at the time after various aspects of his deployment came to light. Now, in your statement, it's at page 29, paragraph 13.5, you said this: "I think it is important to note that a senior manager in the SDS at the time he was deployed raised concerns about his lack of honesty to them. For example, paragraphs 2.4, 2.6 and 5.1 of MPS 0719 722. And we needn't call that document up on the screen, but you're referring to a document that was authored by a manager that we're calling HN53. And
Yes.
you have seen from that document that he carried out an investigation, an internal investigation in relation to James Thompson. Some of the phone records were obtained, some we've looked at a couple of hours ago, and questions were asked, and he produced this document setting out concerns about James Thompson at the time. And despite that, when this was presented to more senior managers, the result was that it was coming to an end anyway, but James Thompson's deployment was halted. His security status was downgraded for 2 years. He had to reapply for his firearms certificate. But as you know, he continued in the Met Police until June 2014. So what is your reaction to the fact that even in 2002, when this document that you referred to in your statement was authored, when there were instances where at least HN53 was raising questions about Thompson, how he was treated, how he was disciplined, or the lack of discipline? What was your reaction to that, to what the managers did?
Firstly, I want to say that any other actions on their part aside, because I don't know about any other actions on their part, it was nice to read HN53's utter disgust at the lack of action taken, his frustration at the situation. Equally, and even more so, HN9, who seemingly spoke to his wife about it, who was disgusted enough to call and leave quite a firm message for Colin Black. It was nice to see that there were some people there who were trying to do their job. Having said that, unfortunately, they were not the people who had any say in the outcome. I think the fact that with so many questions being raised around James Thompson's actions, about his criminal activities, which were acknowledged by Colin Black, around his clearly inappropriate relationships, which were acknowledged by Colin Black, and around the multiple lies that he had told to the Metropolitan Police at all levels, which were a proven fact at that point, they decided that the important thing was not to make the Metropolitan Police look bad. And they acknowledge in their internal documents that the risk of taking any other form of action, be it even just more formal discipline against James Thompson, might make them look bad. And that was what they based their decision to take no action upon. As somebody who had their entire life uprooted by their actions, and not just by James Thompson's actions, but by the actions of the Metropolitan Police and his managers, and who knows several other people in the same situation, I'm disgusted by them.
What effect has it had on you that in 2002, when these concerns are raised, that instead of more severe action being taken against James Thompson, and even you being told the truth of who he was, what's the effect that it's had on your life that for all the years that followed, you were believing that he was a real individual?
It's affected memories I have with my mother. It's affected the life of my best friend, and that's my fault in my head. It has removed any last possible remnant I had remaining that I could trust somebody, because, as I said earlier, I am an independent person. I don't rely on many people. And yet it turns out one of the people I did rely on and knew for over 2 decades was someone who didn't even exist and who was paid taxpayers' money, my money, to spy on the intimate and personal details of my life and then make things up about my friends when they realized that he wasn't supplying any reasonable information. It's inconceivable to me the level that some of these actions were approved at. Any claims that nobody else knew about the attempt to disrupt my house purchase is clearly false, as it says this memo came out of a meeting with Colin Black and other SDS managers. You would think if he'd mentioned disrupting a house purchase and they knew nothing about it, they'd say, sorry, what was that? What have you done? Any claims that there wasn't a high level of approval, I look at some of the documents for Operation Lime where they were planning how they would disrupt this purchase, and they had contingency plans in place for if they didn't get the gun, that they had obviously contacted UK Customs and told them to let that vehicle through. At what level is approval given for an apparently illegal firearm supposedly intended to be used to murder somebody going to be allowed through customs? Who approves that? So to me, this is not just the disgusting, pathetic things that James has done while he's playing spy. It is showing the absolute corruption of the entire system, not even just the Metropolitan Police, but whoever had knowledge of these actions. It's mind-blowing.
Wendy, everything that you have set out in your statement is in evidence, and everything that you have said today is in evidence. Those are all the questions I have for you, but may I ask whether there are any other points that you wish to make to the inquiry, and if you need to take some time to think about that question, please do. But essentially, is there anything else that you would wish to tell us?
Yes. A couple of things that haven't come up that I do just want to flag. not that I'm expecting answers from you at this point, but I want to ensure that they are flagged prior to James Thompson giving evidence. Firstly, I believe his ridiculous claims of dissociation disorder can be easily disproven by the fact that he was taking actions all the time, for example, by falsely reporting that Sarah was dating L1 to keep his cover and his inappropriate relationships well hidden. He knew exactly what he was doing at all times. This wasn't somebody with dissociation disorder at all. And I would love to know from this officer who refused to speak to any psychiatrists or mental health professionals, even when he was told it wasn't optional, he had to. At what point and by whom was he diagnosed with dissociation disorder? And how did he cure it, I wonder? Because apparently he has it no longer. So that's first thing. I'd also like to raise the fact that he was given back his firearm and returned to active protection duties 2 years after all of this was flagged, and it was reported that he would be under close supervision, including in his contact with his wearies, which obviously didn't happen. It was despite the fact that SDS undercover officers were not supposed to be taking up protection duties within a 10-year period of their deployment ending, despite the fact that a risk assessment was flagged by HM53 about his firearm being returned. So not only was no action taken, in fact, action was directly taken to take steps to move forward him being returned his firearm and returned to protection duties, including for Tony Blair, as the photo has now emerged of him actively protecting him in front of a crowd of what was no doubt left-wing anti-war activists. What would have happened if somebody had recognized him and tried to approach him in that scenario? Did he have a gun on him? What would he have done? These are questions that I think relate more seriously to decisions taken outside the SDS and in his future deployment with the Metropolitan Police. I also would like to flag a document that I have seen, and I believe this is in the hearing bundle, so if it's not, please breach me as necessary, but I'm pretty confident I saw it in the hearing bundle, which was in relation to a letter he received in August 1996 before his placement, while he was apparently planning on joining the SDS, which talks about their last consultation is an invitation to group therapy and says, in the meantime, keep taking the tablets. Was this a mental health issue that existed in 1996? If so, what was it? And I'd like that to be addressed and any investigation into that taken. The last thing I would like to say is just that I feel there's abundant evidence to show that at every stage, at every level, the Metropolitan Police has encouraged, facilitated, and even covered up abuses of human rights. And in my opinion, they are continuing to do so. And I sincerely hope for those of us who've been impacted so severely that the inquiry holds both the undercover officers and all levels of management accountable for these actions.
Wendy, thank you. I'm going to ask whether there are any further questions in re-examination or any specific Rule 10 questions. I'm told there's not. I'm grateful, so I'm told there are no Rule 10s, but so there is an issue. There is no issue. Thank you.
So you have now reached the end.
I have.
Yeah, right. Ms. Kilroy, do you wish to re-examine? No. I'm told that if I look you in the face directly, I appear to be looking away from you, and I must therefore look at the camera. Can
Yes,
I
I
ask?
can see you very clearly now. Thank you.
I'm delighted to hear it. It seems very strange, but may I hope, looking at you, thank you for the care and attention that you have given to your evidence and to your not easy task of giving it orally and publicly. I'm very grateful to you. I am very dependent upon those who participated in the events that I'm looking into, providing their own evidence about it, so that I can make a judgment about where the truth lies and about what really happened. And I'm very grateful to you for your assistance.
Thank you.
That concludes proceedings for today. There is now going to be a half-term break, so we will resume, if I've got my dates right, on the 3rd of November, and I hope that will be at 10 o'clock with Ellie's re-examination.
All rise.